Welcome, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here for this. We think we have a terrific group of people. I'm John Rogers, and Chairman and CEO of Ariel Investments in Chicago. And you might be wondering why an investment person has been doing this, but we are kind of the one mutual fund company and money management company in the country that also has a small public school that's 16 years old that Arnie Duncan created while he worked at Ariel. So being involved with inner city education and financial literacy has been central to our mission. So it's a thrill to be here with a group of people who share that mission and care so much about trying to move the ball forward in these extraordinarily important days in our country's history. And I know all of you share that mission and that vision also. So thank you for being here. First, I'd just like to introduce our panel. First is Scott Budnick, who is the president of Green Hat Films and founder of the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. Next is James Anderson, executive administrator of the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. Next is Kirsten Lodal, founder and CEO of Lyft. And following her is Jacqueline Gonzalez-Reyes, advocate, Lyft Los Angeles. And last but not least, our last two, Eric Dawson, president and co-founder of Peace First. And finally, Malik, Voyard, alumnus of Peace First. And to get us started today, we're going to have a short video, which will help put everybody into the mood. So if we could cue up the video.
Lyft has helped over 60,000 people in helping them access the critical resources that they need to get out of poverty and stay out of poverty. Focusing on the whole person, Lyft is grounded on the principle that real change occurs with long-term and comprehensive relationships that we build with our clients.
One of the things that's unique about Lyft is that it's a neighbor-to-neighbor model. So when a community member needs help, they come into our offices and they're paired with another community member, a volunteer advocate. It could be a student, a professional, a retiree, and they work together to find solutions to challenges around housing or employment or legal issues, immigration challenges.
It's about restoring a hope and a respect and confidence in a community of people that often feel left behind.
I wasn't supposed to come to jail. I was supposed to be free in the world.
I want to change and make my mother proud.
They may be young, but these teens are writing about their grown-up struggles in poetry and prose. It's called Inside Out Writers. This innovative California program allows hundreds of juveniles, some facing decades in prison, to find their voice.
To a lot of the public, these kids are disposable. These kids are just like voiceless. They're forgotten. I saw them here as young kids. I then had to watch them go into an adult prison system that, if no one intervenes, is just going to grind them up and spit them out.
After years of teaching classes, Scott Budnick met Prophet Walker, then a teenager, sentenced to 6 years for assault. Budnick and Walker had an idea.
X-coordinate is straight across.
A college program for young offenders in adult prison. It rewards inmates who behave well and want to learn, letting them study together and live together. Now the program is spreading to prisons across the state.
It gets me out of these walls around me. I have my own freedom when I write.
Prophet Walker was the first graduate from the college program. Today, 75 inmates have graduated and currently hundreds more are enrolled. The return rate to prison for inmates from some of these college programs drops below 3%. The state average is higher than 60%.
For 20 years, Peace First has taught students use critical skills of peacemaking.
When students have Peace First, they start to see themselves as problem solvers and young leaders.
Peace First challenges young people to take a stand in their communities.
We are teaching students in a very fun and interactive way how to be a peacemaker. What is different about Peace First is it's a sustainable model.
It gives kids a chance to take the work that they do in school and bring it outside the classroom and actually see positive changes that they can make in their community.
What makes Peace First unique is that we start young. So we don't wait until young people are struggling in schools, but we actually start when young people are 3 or 4 years old. We stay over time. So we're not a program that flies in, does a workshop, and then leaves, but we're there with students and teachers year in and year out. That students just don't sit around learning ideas, but they have to get out of their seats and practice it.
Peacemaking is a very active thing.
Okay.
All right.
Well, Scott, let's start with you. You're a very successful film producer. Can you tell us how you developed your passion around the criminal justice system?
Sure. I grew up in Atlanta and grew up with a father who was always having us go out and serve others. So when I got to Los Angeles and started working in the film business, I spent the first 3 years just kind of trapped in this bubble in Hollywood and wasn't helping much of anyone, and was not really paying attention to the issues that were happening 10 miles away on the other side of the 10 freeway, and not really going east of Vine, and kind of just felt trapped a little bit. And then a friend of mine who worked for another filmmaker asked me to come down to a juvenile hall. And I went down to juvenile hall. It was in Silmar, California, and it's called The Compound. It's the one place where every child in Los Angeles who commits a crime and is being tried as an adult is kept in this one area. And I sat in this writing class, and the topic was forgiveness. And I sat with 14, 15, and 16-year-olds who were facing life in prison and listening to them write about forgiveness. And they would each stand up, and their hands were shaking, and they would read these papers. They've never sat and read anything in front of anybody, and they'd read these papers on forgiveness. So in that moment, hearing their stories, I knew that it was amazing to me that they were victims their entire life. Victims of, none of them had fathers. All of them were incredibly poor. Most had been abused. And a lot were from the foster care system. So our hearts went out to them. But the second that they made a mistake, we're going to put you in this prison. We're going to give up on you. You're going to be invisible. And to me, why, if they make a childhood mistake, do we let them go and never think of them again? So one day a foster kid, the next day you're in the criminal justice system, and we lose how much we care about you. So in that moment, I just started to come back every Saturday. That was 2003, and I've been back every Saturday since. And we'll talk about more later, but that's how I caught the bug.
Well, things you know, my father was a juvenile court judge for 20 years, and in Illinois, everyone always thought that was the place not to go. But he really loved it. He felt he could make a difference by working there, in particular because he thought that the advocates for the young people were not skilled, often not well trained, often overworked. So you talk about sort of what that environment is like within the system and how the kids are sort of falling through the cracks.
Yeah, obviously, if you talk about just the court system in general, it's a lot is about resources, and these kids go into the system, and often, if they're lucky, they get a public defender. If they're unlucky, they get a bar panel attorney who is very poorly trained. I just had a kid get sentenced to second-degree murder. He was one of 12 co-defendants. He never touched the weapon. He was involved in a fistfight at a party. He just got sentenced to 45 to life. And his bar panel attorney, there were 60 people at the party, and he interviewed 0 witnesses. Didn't interview one person at the party. The prosecution put on their theory. He put on absolutely no defense whatsoever, 0. Advised the client not to take the stand, which was a poor decision. And now there's a major law firm that's taking the case pro bono, and they went and interviewed these 60 witnesses, and now the kid is getting a new trial based on the incompetency of his original counsel, but only because this private law firm decided to jump in and do this pro bono. So, the odds are greatly stacked against them in court. And then when you get into the prison system, California Department of Corrections added an R, rehabilitation, onto the end of their name, but that's about as far as it went. I've been just pushing and pushing, and it's a fight every day. We started 6 different college programs at 6 different prisons, but it's like kind of the one ray of hope. These private, we partnered with Cal Poly Pomona, so we have private professors coming in and 60 grad students coming in, working with these inmates, and that's kind of the only ray of hope. The staff there aren't really there in prison to rehabilitate anybody. They're prison guards. So it's all about trying to get the community to kind of invest in these prisons, to actually bring in people to really care about them. Because it all comes down to having one person that really cares about you. And that's usually coming from the outside, not happening within the mechanism itself, within the prisons themselves.
So Malik, you have been in the gang environment, and you've also been involved. You understand what it's like, the kind of issues Scott's talking about. Can you give us the perspective from your perspective and your friends and others, how they view the court system and the penal system today?
As far as when you're in there and you're dealing with it, it's one of those things where it's kind of out of your power, and you go in there and you truly don't have a voice, because even the public defenders, oftentimes if you ask to speak to the judge, they'll tell you yes, and when you go into the courtroom, when it actually begins the process, they'll never ask if you can speak. And afterwards, they would tell you that they didn't have time. And I see this countless times. I mean, you do not have a voice anymore. Unless you're paying for your lawyer, which apparently more than half of the population come from low socioeconomic status, they can't afford to have a lawyer. And many times we're pushed upon with these public defenders, and their job isn't to win our case. Their job is just to get through to the next case because they have such a large load. And so oftentimes you feel as you do not have a voice.
So what drew you into the gang life originally? Can you tell us a little bit about that history?
As far as just how I got involved, I think just to touch down on that base, I'll just touch a little bit on just the overall view of it. Sure. At a young age, I was quickly exposed to a dysfunctional family, as many children are. I dealt with physical and emotional abuse from my parents, and I remember coming home and receiving these beatings from my mother, father, and brother every time they were mad. And I remember thinking to myself that there was something wrong with me, because not all three of them could be wrong. There had to be something wrong with myself. I couldn't really think past that because I was so young. And at this age, I was A and B student. I was doing excellent. I couldn't get involved in sports because we couldn't afford going to sports. And quickly, as my parents began to fight more and they were divorced finally, I found myself living in a household with my older brother and my father. Now, at this time, my older brother became deeply addicted to crystal meth and involved in gangs. So as a young child, my reality of coming home wasn't coming home to a family. It was coming home to an abusive brother that would beat me half to death as he would have these psychotic rampages on this drug. My reality was coming home to a father that would come home at 11 o'clock at night and lock himself in his room and not ask me how my day was going. So at a certain point in my life, I realized that I told myself I was worthless. And many events throughout my life helped to push this notion in my mind, as far as times when I was in true need and my father turned his back on me. And as I found that I knew this gang life was false, and I knew this love that they were giving me wasn't true, it was better than nothing. And at that moment, that's exactly what I had, was nothing. So as I began to go in and out of the incarceration system, I believe I felt so worthless that I believed that that's where I belong. I truly believe that in this jail cell was where I was going to spend the rest of my life, and I had to accept that reality because I didn't have a future. I didn't have a family member to pull me to the side, tell me everything was going to be okay. Up into my last incarceration, where I was facing over 30 years, and I was that kid that you pointed at and said, forget about him, he's hopeless, he's never going to change. Completely gang entrenched, one of the most violent guys in the facility, and everyone was like, just turn your back on him because he's not going to change. Yet one person came into my life and helped me realize that I was worth something. So don't ever believe that that kid can't change, because he can. And he can make a difference in so many other people's lives. I was able to finally be released after 3 years for good behavior. I was sentenced to 7. I met a great man named Scott Budnick who helped me realize that I could achieve anything I want. I've been home for 8 months now, and I've been able to be part of a group called ARC, known as Anti-Recidivism Coalition, where I could give back everything I can to the community and the kids that are dealing with the issues I was once dealing with. And as of last week, we're an official 501c3.
That's extraordinary. Just tell me just quickly, how did they find you? How did you get engaged?
Scott Budnick, as far as one of my other mentors' name is Rosalinda, do something that many other people are afraid to do, and that's go into the jail systems and actually have a personal relationship. Not one of those, I come in and say, you can succeed, I'm going to pat you on the back and let you go on your way. It's, I will put my reputation on the line for you because I know you can succeed. And I was able to encounter them because as they started to develop these programs inside these jails, people gravitate towards it. People don't want to be in there. Trust me, even the hardest gang member in the world does not want to be in jail. He doesn't want this life. But at times, this is all he knows. That's his comfort zone. And especially as young kids, as we start seeing these programs where we could achieve anything we want, we start gravitating. And I was blessed to be able to encounter Scott and Rosalinda, which changed my life in many ways.
Wow. Okay, well, so we have to move on. Why don't we jump to Eric? You started Peace First when you were only 18 years old. What drove you and gave you the confidence that you could achieve something so extraordinarily important?
So my real answer, because we're among friends,
I experienced violence as a kid, and I was, I don't know what the technical term is, but a pretty pissy adolescent. Maybe that is the technical term. So my experience with young people who experience violence, and James and I have talked a lot about this, is we tend to do one of three things, right? We hurt other people because we're angry and we're seeking some form of justice. We hurt ourselves through poor decision-making, substance abuse, unprotected sex, you name it. And some of us become lucky and we become organizers, right? We channel that anger to the outside world. So at a very young age, I became an organizer. And what I realized in doing this work, I started my first organization when I was 14 around disability awareness in my huge public high school, is that we have a model for thinking and understanding young people, right? They're either victims or potential victims that we need to protect. So we spend a lot of money trying to protect kids, or they're perpetrators we want to punish, right? So we medicate young people, we incarcerate young people, we turn our schools into prisons. I mean, literally, prisons. Metal detectors, police officers, or figuratively, prisons. Zero tolerance policies, don't talk in the hallway, sit in your seat. And the problem, if you remember nothing else that I say, the problem with that is that young people are not just victims and perpetrators, they are problem solvers. Right? Every day in this country, young people are doing good things. They're engaged in their communities. They're resolving conflicts without fighting. And so I wanted to build a whole different model for how we understand young people. Right? So I'm going to share two very scary statistics for you. The first is from the Berkeley Media Studies Group that studies media trends. And they tracked stories about young people in the media. Guess what percentage of stories about young people were positive in a 12-month period? 1%. 1% of news stories about young people in the United States in the year they studied were positive. Gallup did this fascinating study where they asked adults their impressions of young people. 71% of adults have a negative image of young people. They're dangerous, they're lazy, they're apathetic. So you wonder why we get the policies that we get, right? It's a self-reinforcing image, right? Young people are either these sort of beautiful, precious things we protect or they're problems that we need to punish. And so for 20 years, I know I don't look 39, I moisturize. For 20 years, we have been building a best-in-class program to teach young kids skills of peacemaking. And so Malik will talk more about this, but Malik got Peace First starting in
first grade.
And every year through 8th grade, just like reading and writing, he learned how to go out and make change. The problem is it's hard to replicate programs like this. Right? I could add another 20 schools in Chicago, that's great. We have a waiting list of 248,000 schools around the globe. And so in January, we launched this big idea, which is basically to create a Nobel Peace Prize for young people. Right? So we're going to give $50,000 to 10 young people. James is one of our semifinalists. I'm not allowed to be involved in the process. I'm a little biased. But the idea is to tell stories. Right, to tell the stories of young people like James, young people like Malik, who are doing amazing work in their local communities, right? Demonstrating courage, demonstrating compassion, so that we can change that cycle of young people feeling like victims, like I felt, then committing acts of violence, then contributing to violence, and create a positive cycle.
What prepared you to be able to get this rolling in the beginning, to start talk about, again, the inspiration to start and the ability to get something to bring it to scale from scratch? I mean, I think a lot of people have this dream and vision of building things that are terrific and making a change. I think a lot of us do, but you actually did it. How did you make it work?
So I don't mean to be flip with this answer, but ignorance. Like people always ask me, if you had to do it all over again, what would you do? And I wouldn't do it. I mean, I literally did not know any better. And so that freed me up. I can tell you, I knocked on the doors of psychologists and nonprofit leaders, and every single one said, you're too young to do this. And so I said, well, screw you, I'm going to do it anyway. And so we wrote little cards to every public and parochial school in Boston and said, could we send students to your classroom to teach your kids about peacemaking? They said yes, we did it. It was sort of crappy, as a first program should be. And then we did evaluation and learned how to do it better. And so for 20 years, you build a cycle. But there's something about fearlessness and ignorance and surrounding yourself. I mean, James said this with mentors. So people like you and others who say, I don't know exactly what you're trying to do, Eric, but I think it's important, and I'm going to lend you some of my political and social capital and financial capital to make that work.
So Malik, Tell us about what makes this program special and how it impacted your life.
Starting at an early age, I realized that, I was already in a household where they would ask me how I felt, and it wasn't hard for me to speak up on what I felt was wrong, but Peace First kind of helped to bring that to a new level, to where I was able to do service learning projects, to where I was able to go outside and talk to people about stopping gun violence in the local neighborhood. Things like that make it better, because at a young age you feel like you're actually making a difference in your community. You feel like you're actually doing something that's gonna help someone who doesn't have that same opportunity that you have. And being able to do that kind of steers you towards the right direction, if I could say that. It was one of those experiences that I will never give up, because I was able to connect with my friends. I was actually able to connect with some enemies, people who would probably take my turn on the slide or something. But other than that, I mean, it was great, and that's the best part of the experience.
Can you tell a story or an experience that you've had where the skills you've learned and the exposure you've had have helped you to solve a specific problem?
Yes. I'm in a household of about 4 women. About 4 women.
Nice.
And they may bicker back and forth. I'm usually the mediator. I stand in the middle and I say, okay, I'm not going to take this side. I'm not going to take that side. You guys just need to talk this out. That's one of the little problems. The bigger problem is my father. He was never the best role model to me. When it came to things like that, more like my mother and my grandmother were more like my mother and my father figure. He would probably come, I never lived with him, but he'll probably come and be drunk and start a big riot and a big fight. And my little sister would be there crying. I would be there crying. And at some point in my life, I realized, I don't want to be like him. My mother always told me, you're not going to be like him. But after Peace Games and Peace First, he would come and I would be angry with him, but I would always find a way to say, you know what, you're my father, let me talk to you. Why are you so angry? I'll try to empathize with him, make him relax so he doesn't come to the house and start yelling and causing so much problems and making my little sister cry and making a big commotion in my house. And really, I kind of became that person that was the one that they would send outside to talk to him and say, you know what, can you please calm him down, because this is too much of a problem. And I would talk to him and he'll tell me about his life story, and he'll go off probably drunk, but he'll walk off and it wouldn't be as bad as it would have been if I wasn't able to, talk to him.
Thank you. Kirsten, you've helped to build this extraordinary organization, Lyft. Can you tell us about what was your inspiration to found it and the day-to-day work that's so important today?
Sure. Well, I guess I was mostly inspired to start Lyft because of this, because I was angry about double standards and about the extent to which we have, kind of 50 years post-war on poverty, mind you, built this social services system for poor and low-income people, for more than 50 million people in this country. It's a human services system that's so profoundly inhumane, that mostly subjects people to long lines, endless bureaucracy, tons of paperwork, and kind of a message that you have no strengths, you have no choices, you have no control. And then we wonder why the trend lines that we care about around poverty and financial security and financial stability for families in this country are so terrible. I mean, you just have to sit in line at most social service agencies and realize that at every level we send a message to people in our society just based on this arbitrary income line about their value and their worth. And I actually grew up in a lot of privilege and kind of saw the flip side of it every direction, the way in which actually, in a lot of ways, our society incentivizes those who happen to be born into the right zip code to go into, a positive educational track, to build wealth, to acquire assets, et cetera. And so, the main idea behind Lyft, which is kind of revolutionarily simplistic, is that we all need the same things in life to get ahead, and that poor people who we so often put on the margins of society need exactly the same type of support, and that includes economic resources for sure, but that's not enough. We also have to have the confidence and the self-belief, as well as the community connections and the social capital to really be able to achieve our goals in life. And so we've built a model now for the last 14 years that has successfully helped nearly 100,000 families achieve their goals. And really our model is just focused on helping people build strong relationships that, like everyone has said here, really reinforces that they've got someone in their corner who can help them identify their goals and achieve the change that they want to achieve for their families. And just in the last year alone, when we still have been kind of struggling with the economic ramifications of the recession, our Lyft families who came in, many of whom are formerly incarcerated immigrants, others that our society has deemed hardest to serve, were able to build their family incomes by close to $15 million. Each one of our families that we were working with was, through a self-determined path, able to increase their housing stability, their financial stability, et cetera. And it's really their own doing. We just served as a facilitator. So.
Keep talking, there's so many organizations that care about these issues passionately. Can you just tell a little bit more about really the one or two things that really distinguish you from your, competitors or peers or others that are out there? And how do you really create the sort of special, unique change that you've been able to accomplish?
Sure. Well, so I think the biggest difference is that, again, most social services are built around a single metric, which is in some ways, can we, most of the time temporarily, boost people above the poverty line? And so 2/3 of all people in America who cross the poverty line fall right back under it within a year. And so we've actually taken our model, again, focuses on helping people provide financial support, but we actually look even more importantly on how are people treated with dignity and respect so that they can actually be motivated to establish their own goals and then work doggedly to achieve those goals. And so what we've found is that actually sometimes the things that we think of as soft in our society, again, dignity, respect, social connection, sense of belonging, all of our data demonstrates that those pieces are actually really the accelerants of transformative economic change for low-income and poor families, and the protective sustainers of that change, so that when you hit a bump in the road in life, you lose your childcare, you have a legal issue, those things will happen. What keeps you from falling off the cliff is whether or not you feel that you have people in your corner to turn to ask for help, and whether or not you feel sufficiently empowered to ask for help. So we've kind of turned the social service model on its head by saying, we're going to take a human-centered design approach to the way that we support people in achieving their goals. And so it's a very different type of model in that way.
So Jacqueline, how did you get introduced to Lyft, and what motivated you to join?
Lyft just opened its doors in Los Angeles in February. And I've always been someone that has always tried to be involved in my community. I guess my story took a detour a year and a half ago. I became a single parent. So I became a single parent, and here I was in my hometown, but it was different now. The last time I was here in my hometown, I was a child. I used to go to school, then come back. Then I got recruited to go to school. So I had spent, not only did I graduate, but I spent the rest of my time in the Midwest. I guess I figured out that it was a hot commodity. Somebody from, it usually used to be black and white. And I guess they saw someone, they're like, oh, you're from LA. Oh, no wonder you're thinking like this. By the time I graduated college, I had different offers. I was in a good place. I guess because I had been working and going to school. And this is, I guess, I always like to go back to it because it's a very good point where I was. My dad had passed away my freshman year. I was put in the position, do I go back to Los Angeles, or do I stay here? I'm the first person in the family to go to a 4-year university, not only attend. But I wanted to successfully graduate. And this is also the economic, right, when the economic turned. So in 2008, I figured out that if I wanted to stay in school, I needed to be quick because money was running out. So I was able to simultaneously throughout my years work part-time, and I say this very humbly, but in different organizations, because I think it was that I wasn't afraid to ask those questions. So it's like, what are we doing right in a union, in union work, or in our school system that I was involved with? But coming back to Los Angeles, I figured that I was not a child anymore. I just didn't have the need to get on the bus and go to school. I had an 8-month-old, right? And I also realized that I had an 8-month-old, but that I made a great decision by staying in school because it secured housing. When my dad passed away, all this time, it actually secured housing. That's, I guess, how I get connected to Lyft, because my social, I navigated every social service you can imagine. I needed health care for my 8-month-old and I needed housing, I needed child care, you name it, I was probably in that office or in that program. And I started seeing that I had enough intellect. My major is in sociology. So I started seeing how things were built, and I guess that was I started seeing that there was this disconnect. There were services that were fragmented, kind of built on the stereotype that if you have fewer resources, that you are the one to blame for. I remember right now they seem, some of the stories seem funny. I remember being in some of the county offices, and probably a lot of this has to do because they're understaffed. But I remember just hearing, next person, next, who's next? And I just started looking around and thinking like, is this a hearing aid section? Is this senior citizen day, or what is it? But why are we screaming at each other? Like that's not a welcoming environment. So I think that that's the point when I got introduced to Lyft and what they were gonna do. Because we run on volunteers, and I think that's the fundamental thing. That
Can I ask you a quick follow-up is, a lot of things you've talked about around financial resources and money issues. Lyft is involved with financial literacy. Could you talk just briefly about the importance of financial literacy and how Lyft has helped you think about those issues?
I think that Lyft is successful because they're non-existent to this point. And when I say that, it's because I'm aware that there's not, the services that I've seen and I've navigated, it basically at one point became a full-time job, trying to even try to navigate those systems. I started seeing that money is just not the only factor when someone is coming with an economic or a financial crisis, right? Or the emotional crisis many other times. So I think what Lyft does that as well is that when somebody comes into our door, we meet them at their starting point. We have people that our whole focus of training, the advocates, is based on being an active listener, being patient, understanding that it's a journey, not a destination. And I think that because we're able to focus that it's more than just having money in your pocket, it's about having someone in your corner. It's about giving the person or reminding the person that they have the capabilities, if they don't have the capabilities, to develop them. And I think for me, I had lost that. I had been in the forefront of marginalized communities. Tell me, I used to be with janitors. I'm not assuming all of you guys read the bio, but it states it very clearly that I was at the forefront of a marginalized community, that I helped bring them better working standards. I knew very early on that there was a problem. But when it came to me, I guess there's a quote that somebody says very well, and it's an author and activist, Arundhati Roy. We're not talking for the voiceless, but we're talking, there's no such thing as the voiceless. They're the deliberately silenced, right? And I think that kind of sums it up.
Okay, well, thank you. I think Scott and Kirsten and Eric, you all are building organizations that I know you want to be able to have enormous impact. Can you talk about the challenges of getting to scale and building something that is really sustainable for the long term?
Yeah, I mean, we literally just got 501c3 status 3 days ago. So I'm looking to hire an executive director, and James is coming aboard full time. So we're a little bit away from scaling, but it's an exciting time, and we spent the last 2 years unofficial, just amounting these incredible men and women who've all been through incarceration. So, I mean, we have 2 cardiologists that were former gang members, went through the prison system, and went through medical school and are now college. We have lawyers, we have engineers, architects, firefighters. So we've kind of just been amassing this group. And in these 2 years of being unofficial and not even being a nonprofit, just literally we have a private Facebook page, we mobilize in that way, and an email list. And we've been going up to Sacramento. Last year, we brought many coalitions of our guys up to pass a bill called SB 9, which was a bill to end juvenile life without parole. We're the only country in the world that sentences juveniles to die in prison. And that bill was stuck in the assembly for 2 years because we had 0 Republican votes and 12 Democrats in the assembly who wouldn't vote for the bill. This was after it passed the Senate. So we brought coalitions of these incredible young men and women up there, and in one day of bringing these coalitions up after 2 years stalled, the bill passed. We got the final 2 votes purely because of these guys and girls. So I really recognize the power of changing the face of the formerly incarcerated, because normally if they ever saw, these legislators are so, most of them have never been in a prison and they don't know the issue, but they're voting on these laws every day. So for them to actually have these young men and women come in coats and ties, not looking like they've ever been in prison, articulate, and being able to say, I used to take away from my community, I used to drain the resources, you had to pay for me to be in prison for X number of years. Now I'm a college graduate, I'm in medical school, I have a family, I'm raising my kids right, I'm paying taxes. Everything changes. And in that day, we ended up passing that bill through the assembly. It got to the governor's desk and the governor signed the bill. So I feel like it took that experience for me to realize how powerful and how this doesn't exist in California at all. We don't have a network of really high achieving, formerly incarcerated young men and women who could do this. So right now it's just kind of we're putting together a strategic plan and figuring out how to scale. Are we going to be Northern California and Southern California? Are we going to have a Sacramento office? So we're just in the process of kind of trying to put together this strategic plan. We have a bunch of experts who have come in and are working with us. So right now, it's just the nuts and the bolts. We have seed financing from the California Wellness Foundation and the California Endowment to get started. So
I'd love to just build on that. So one is the power of stories as an engine for social change. So I'm going to talk about failure and scaling. So for 20 years, we ran programs in LA, New York, and Boston. And we hired smart consultants who came in and helped us develop a strategic plan, right? So they do what smart consultants do. They listen and they do data, and it's like, beautifully bound with charts that were in color. And, we were going to grow by opening up clusters of schools. And we started doing that in LA, New York, and Boston. And the results were great. Like, school violence decreased by 80% here in our LA schools. It's phenomenal. But the economics of it didn't work. So, I could have spent the next, I don't know, let's see, I'm 39. Let's say I'm lucky, 50 years, and I could probably add another 200 schools, right? So again, think about the markets. So I've got 200 new schools, and I've got a waiting list of 248,000 schools. What do you do? So I did one of the hardest things I've done as a leader, which is to say, this is wrong. Like, the plan that I have is not going to work. And so we threw that plan out, or recycled it. We're a green organization. And then we said, what are new ways of scaling? Because I think the traditional way of nonprofit scaling of opening up offices and raising staff and money and a board just can't work in the way that the world is working now. And so I thought of, do you remember the Just Say No campaign? Like where Nancy Reagan went on different strokes and told Arnold not to use drugs. They did that. It was like a frying pan and an egg, and it was your brain, and one was drug. I forget which was which, but it was like, it was don't do drugs, right? Now we've got this, don't be a bully. Like we've got these memes that we tell young people what not to do. And we don't call our young people to anything. I mean, we don't. and then we're shocked they don't show up. And so this new way of scaling is not about just running programs, but it's actually changing a culture, right? What would it look like if you all go, how many of you have kids? Raise your hands. Or grandkids. You're too tired, raise your hand. Like, what if you went home and the first thing you asked your kids, even if they're 30, like, how are you a peacemaker today? Right? It's not holding hands and singing songs or Gandhi and Dr. King. Like, what happens when some jerk cuts you off on the 405? Right? You see your neighbor struggling with their groceries. Or you're at the gym, you hear someone call someone a name that isn't kind. Right? So it's this idea about scaling up the concept of youth peacemaking, which is what the prize is about. It's about inviting young people to try on this identity, which is very different from what we've done for the past 20 years of putting volunteers in schools to run programs.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of resonance here. It's interesting to be at this particular conference, which is mostly about, where it's not comprised of many nonprofit people, but I think one of the things that we, 14 years in, we're working in 6 cities. We've worked with nearly 100,000 families. We've got fantastic data, great ROI and such, but I think we've had to kind of humbly accept that in a lot of ways the nonprofit revenue model of philanthropic-driven growth just creates such tremendous limitations on how much you can really scale, and that relative to the scope of the challenges we're facing, I mean, the size, we've helped tens of thousands of people, there are tens of millions of people who could use our services. We've had to start thinking outside the bounds of just a traditional replication concept to say, what if we actually really thought of our sites in the 6 cities in which we operate as kind of learning laboratories and demonstration models for what we really think in a lot of ways are very adaptable and adoptable solutions that public systems can take on as well as private providers. So we're increasingly focused on scale being defined as demonstrating next stage impact, being able to communicate that impact really broadly and much more openly than we ever have, and then working hard on systemic influence. So we look at kind of the 3 Ps of policy, practice, and perception. So how can we build an easier to navigate social services system, period, on the policy side, on the practice side? How can we really try to help other nonprofit providers, and there are tons of them in every community, adopt some of the practices that we know are successful? And then on the perception piece, we do believe we're still really locked into this pretty insidious story of the welfare queen. It was cycled and termed in different ways in the most recent election season, around moochers and the 47% and you name it, but we have to also tackle the storytelling and perception piece. So that's increasingly what we're focused on, is going deep, deep, deep in the sites where we exist and then pulling on larger systemic levers based on what we're demonstrating.
Before we go to the audience, Tanya, one last quick question. And this is for James and Jacqueline and Malik. In Chicago, we had a history 30, 40 years ago of a lot of successful African-American businesses and some Latino businesses. I know the African-American community better because that's where I grew up. But John Johnson had created Ebony and Jet magazine and employed lots of people, created a lot of philanthropy. Johnson Products did Afro Sheen and Ultra Sheen and created lots, again, philanthropy, helping Dr. King and the Urban League and providing 500 jobs. And then there's Ed Gardner, who had Soft Sheen, and he created the Black on Black Love campaign to stop violence in the South Side. He helped get Harold Washington elected. He, again, employed hundreds of people. All those companies are basically gone from the South Side of Chicago. And so my question for you guys, how important it is to have role models like that in your community, how important it is to have manufacturing and permanent service jobs in your communities where you guys can see hope and opportunity to build financial success for your families.
That is huge. I mean, especially for individuals coming from a place as I did, you're automatically hit with the fact that it's going to be hard to get a job. People aren't going to want to accept you because of your past. And when you come home, it's so limited. Like, it's difficult to have a kid come home, get him on his feet, get him ready to change his life, moving forward, and then there's no opportunity for a job. He's struggling financially. He can't eat. He doesn't have money to survive to the next day. Psychologically, that affects you. It makes you think, what am I doing this for? Especially at a young age, because you're not at the mature age where you can look at it, and even some adults go through this. But especially at a young age, when you look at yourself, you can't think like, you know what, this is just a momentary period, I'm gonna get past it. You feel like, what is going on with my life? So to be able to have those role models that can come in and show you that you can succeed, but will be there and help you out, is humongous, because it gives you the inspiration to know that someone's there for you, that you're not just this inanimate object that nobody can see, right? That someone of an important stature realizes that you're important and wants something better for you and will offer those opportunities. And to have those permanent jobs there makes it a realization in your mind that you can succeed and the opportunities are right there in your face. They're not just going to throw you out into the sea with the lights off and just leave you lost.
I think I would have to echo a bit what he's saying. I think that it's very important, right, to give examples at every level. I think that, you know, there's so much going on in our world that is changing, right? For example, yesterday we had someone, the alarm system went up, and automatically we started seeing people in panic a bit. And I think that if we're raising children that are our future tomorrow, we need to be able to kind of bring them in a loving scenario. You know, when I think about perhaps mentors, right, that people are empowered, that are doing this, perhaps bringing businesses that look like me or any of us sitting down here, I start thinking to myself that, you know, this is a very positive thing that is going on. Not only does it tell people that you can be that person in a couple of years if you're a child, but it also kind of lets them know that, you know, there's a bigger picture out there. For example, the economy here in Los Angeles is so different to where I was in Cincinnati. Right here, we've kind of understood. You have multiple businesses. For example, I could just name a few: Macy's, Curaçao, that have taken advantage of, you know, the big market that there is of you know, doing products for the diversity crowd, right? Whereas perhaps in Cincinnati, Ohio, it was kind of like, yeah, they don't have any clout or power. There's no such thing as them. You know, why should we market to them? They're still not the majority. But right here, it's a different thing. I can, you know, how many times, you know, for some people I might get them upset, but how many times, because there's a diverse crowd, how many times do we not pick up the phone and hear not one language, two, but three? And I think that kind of tells you that there's a reason why they're doing that, whether it's a corporate level or whatever level you're hearing it, there's a reason why they're doing that, because they understand that the community that they're serving is different. And I think that if we can take this all over the country and start saying, well, it doesn't matter. Sometimes we start thinking, let's invest where we can track. There's some things that you cannot track. For example, how do you track? We need to start changing the model of where we're investing. We need to start seeing what is giving solutions and start investing on the right things that solve problems, that make people contributing members of society.
Okay, thank you. Malik, any added thoughts to those perspectives?
They kind of sum a lot of it up. It's just basically all of it up. But for me, having those people in our communities, it gives you something to aspire to. It makes you feel like, okay, they've gone through similar situations I've gone through, maybe even worse, and they've come out of it and they've made something of themselves. To be able to do that, you know, you look within yourself and you say, like James said, I am in a situation where I'm struggling, but this person was able to do it, so can I. And you know, another thing is to have those role models, you know, the youth, we're the future. We're the people that are gonna make all the changes in the future. And to have the people to look up to, that gives us more of a model to say, you know what, this person was a positive person in my community. Let me be that person for someone that's gonna come after me. And that's all I feel about it.
Well, thank you.
I think too, even beyond just being a role model, which is huge, it's like when these guys come home and they have to check the I've been convicted of a felony box on an application. To counter that, it just sometimes takes one person, like anybody in this audience right here, to say, hey, trust me, this guy's a great guy. He'll do great work for you. And that check doesn't matter anymore. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I had 3 guys who were formerly incarcerated work on The Hangover, in the props department, in the set dressing department, and as an electrician. And it was my first time kind of on one of my films taking a chance on these guys. All 3 of them are in the union now. All 3 of them work on TV shows, commercials, movies. I mean, nonstop work because they're hustlers. They did a great job. They wanted it so much more than the traditional person that was there. And so now on the next movie we use 6, on the movie after that we use 9, and then all these other people on different TV shows. Like I have a director of photography on The Mentalist, a TV show, that's hired 4 on his own because he loves to see how hard they work and how bad they want it. So it just takes us to come and believe in someone and say, you know what, they're going to do great work for you. And then, so it's a little more than just being a role model. It's being a role model, but also being willing to raise your hand and step up.
Well, I love that because, at least what I've seen, and this is good for this crowd, so many of the well-meaning private equity guys and hedge fund guys who typically are guys and who've, literally made billions of dollars, they'll be doing a lot around charter school and education reform and giving scholarships places. But if you actually go and walk the halls of those organizations, you see no people of color in any meaningful positions. And so the kind of work that you're doing there, I think, is extraordinarily important. We're giving that kind of opportunity and faith and belief in these young people. It's really, really rare. And so it's terrific.
I think there's also a lot of, entrepreneurial fervor, even amongst the communities that we work with, even, within low-income and poor communities. I think one of the interesting trends we've even seen through the course of the recession years, as jobs have been harder to find and job searches have taken longer, have been more and more Lyft clients starting their own businesses, client families starting lending pools and finding ways to create different types of capital markets, whether they're kind of official or not. And so, for in some of the great stories that we've seen of former clients actually going off and starting companies, I can guarantee you those are the first individuals who then come back to Lyft and want to hire from other clients and such, so that there is, I think that pay it forward dynamic is really important to infuse in the corporate sector as well. I think that's really where scale happens. So.
Thank you. I think we have time for questions. I just have a couple quick guidelines as we'd like everyone to ask very crisp, short questions. We have a big panel, and I can already see a lot of questions. And if you could try to identify one person to answer the question, because it's a big panel, we can't have all 6 answer every question. So I'll just start here and keep moving.
I'd like to direct my question to you. I just started, don't have the 501c3 yet, 2 years ago, a nonprofit, and I take education into women's shelters. And I loved what you said about the storytelling, and that's how we learn. God, I forgot my question. I think I was headed to, do you have any advice as to how to scale that so that, like you said, 200 people, but there are so many women's shelters globally that I would like to help, and I think one abused woman is one too many. So any advice to make this a global thing, I would really appreciate it.
It's a big question. So just very quickly, and this is my theory on life. I think that all social change happens through relationships, period. And our currency of relationships is storytelling. And what I've learned in my work is it's about how we scale up stories and ideas and connect people. Like AA is one of the most phenomenal social change entities that no one owns, right? It's a set of ideas that are out there. Doesn't work for every problem or every issue. So I think the 3 things you figure out is what is your core? So what is your theory of change? What's your special sauce? What is your calling? So what's being asked of you? What's the market? What's your mission? And then what's your capacity? What are you able to do? And where you create a Venn diagram between your capacity, calling, and core, I think is where you figure out your sweet spot for scale.
Thanks.
That's trademarked, by the way. The 3 C's.
Ambassador Kirsten from Ambassador of Ghana to U.S. I'd like to comment on a statement that a point that Kirsten just made, and just maybe create the awareness that, she talked about limited funding for all the work, the tireless work that you all are doing, to save our children. Now, is it possible out of this conference, Roger, maybe to create, instead of a public-private partnership for businesses, maybe to create a private NGO partnership, for the sake of the youth, so that they don't fall off the cliff, so that the families that otherwise will have had problems, and eventually have, difficulties down the line, will not, be caught in that quagmire.
Anyone have an answer? It's okay if we don't. We can.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you were to aggregate the resources of this conference, and I mean, I think there's a lot of focus on philanthropy and even kind of more venture models of philanthropy, impact investing, et cetera. So I don't know if there's anything organized that the Institute is doing, but I would suggest, because I know we got to get to the other questions, but I think Michael Clouden and Mike Milken and Paul Irving, the leadership there, I know they love bringing people together. I know that's part of the beauty of our conference here. So I think getting to the leadership of the Milken Institute and throwing out that kind of a concept would have a potential to maybe for next year to be able to build on what we've been doing here today. Kurt?
Hi, Kurt Summers, and John Rogers is my idol, so that's why I'm here. Kirsten, this question's for you.
Yeah.
You talked about the concept of having sort of learning centers, and it's very consistent with the theme from each of the nonprofit leaders here, which is, leverage, scale, et cetera. Two questions, really, in that. One is, as an entity, how do you think about kind of the dilution of message downscale, and AA is a great example of how there hasn't been a dilution of message, and there's no owner, but it seems to be that there's a risk of that when you don't own it anymore, and you're sort of teaching the teachers. And then the second is, related to this question about those in the room that are in a position to give and be philanthropic, the concept of there being common platforms for scale and for leverage. So in Chicago, for example, right now, social and emotional learning is a huge concept, and we're pushing that with a lot of our efforts with youth development and anti-violence. How, as a philanthropist, as a giver, can we help drive that in a way that is productive to the nonprofit community, where there's kind of common platform, common message, people having leverage and teaching teachers?
Okay. So to the first question about dilution, I guess this is, first off, I would say we have very intentionally kept Lyft as a single organization, even though we've got multiple sites. Our fabulous Los Angeles Executive Director, Michelle, is right here. But we are one organization, and that's so that we do retain full kind of control over the quality of services that are being delivered, and can quickly pipe innovation through our own system, so that under anything that's been branded with Lyft, we really have chosen to stay in a pretty highly controlled environment. As far as though then leapfrogging into a different type of scale, I think what we're focusing on is the many, many parts of what we're doing that we really think are highly adaptable and adoptable, and I think we've had to challenge ourselves around the dilution concern, just to say, if we do this right, we actually can find entities and enlightened leadership across the country that we think can replicate these ideas, but not under our brand, under their own brands and with the fidelity of their own brands. And we think that's what we have to do. And so there are going to be lessons learned from there, but I think we've solved it by saying, actually, we're not going to possess the expansion of this idea. We're not hung up on the intellectual property, because we think a lot of our ideas are pretty unoriginal, frankly. We've just applied them. And so I think we've taken more of that mindset, which certainly would be different in a for-profit environment. And I think what you're doing around issue-based philanthropy and aggregating around something like social emotional learning is exciting to see. And I think what we would push for is more philanthropic pools that look at the interconnected issues of education, poverty, our criminal justice system, and recognize that these are continuum issues, and the more we silo, the more we actually prevent our ability to kind of from cradle to career solve these challenges. So that would be one thought.
Well, thank you. And I think Lauren's going to decide who will get the last two questions.
As we realized from this really fabulous conversation here, that the money from philanthropy is going to have to come from more sources. Why do you think that the large African American businesses gave up on South Chicago when we know that certainly in these locked facilities there it's hugely disproportionate African American? I mean, LA is 8% African American, it's 40% in these facilities. Are there lessons to be learned there for the future of support for these brilliant ideas that we've heard about here?
I'd love to have more time to answer that. Maybe next year we could have a panel on that question. But the quick answer, I think, is those companies, the CEOs got older, retired, sold their businesses. And as time went on, there was this premise that large corporations and nonprofits would work with minority business. And that ultimately ended up being one of these kind of false premises. So you can see that the foundations, the universities, the hospitals, the major corporations based in Chicago say they want to do business with minority companies, but they really don't. And so there are so many companies that got started with hope, with opportunities they thought would be there, and then when there were phantom opportunities, they weren't able to grow their businesses to scale. And so I think we have to inspire. There's some good examples where it's working in Chicago. University of Chicago, for example, now does business across the board with minority companies in everything from legal to advertising to marketing to construction to everything. And it makes a difference in the community around the university. We need to inspire everyone to have that same kind of spirit. McDonald's does a lot with building real minority suppliers of scale as well as restaurant owners. We need to be able to replicate that kind of success. Last example I always give is, wouldn't it be great if Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, instead of just giving $100 million to Newark, had built one of his campuses in Newark? And think of all the jobs that would have been created, and then think about all the other businesses that would have grown to scale because they could have done business with Facebook in Newark. So I think we need to be able to try to get that kind of goal going forward. So I think maybe there's one last question in the back, and then we'll close it. Sorry. Thank you very much for asking the.
Hello, my name is Davida Lachman-Messer of the Malik Institute Israel Center, and I will try to suggest another pool of resources which I'm trying to develop too, is the institutional investors pool of. Institutional investors actually are, how can I say, they're securing our pension. Now, if society will be better when we be older, and I'll be older quicker than you, then hopefully our life will be better. So applying to institutional investors and asking them to participate in then some part of the social change looks to me very essential, not only as philanthropic money, but also as business-oriented money for a better future generation. I would like your comment on this, please. Thank you.
I know we have to close down here, but just to say that I don't know if others have on the institutional side, we do need to inspire institutional money managers to do more in the community. I think there's a panel coming up next on this issue, actually, which will be terrific, and some things this evening that'll fit with that. But any last thoughts?
I actually do. I think that sometimes it's very this message is for the policymakers. This message is for the investors. I think that everybody here that you see on stage, right? We've a lot of times we face is it's a hard sell, right, to invest on us, but it's a safe bet, and you have to know that. It's a safe bet because we can bring contributing people to our society. But I'll close it up to this, and I took this extra 1 minute because I've been designing this quote with the students that I teach, and it goes as follows: hope keeps us all going in this room. Okay, mistakes makes us human. We've all made mistakes, even in our nonprofits or even the way that we've handled the policies that we're making. But failure makes us stronger, and love keeps us alive. Okay, so I think that if that's all, perhaps I can share with you, and you can leave with that. It's just a human factor. Thank you very much.
That's a great way. Congratulate. Thank you very much. Give a round of applause to our great panel. Thank you. Great way to close.
Check. Thank you. And I would just ask you to continue your conversations outside the room, please.